Hello, and welcome back to Storytime with Eric Zimmer. First, I read the foreword and preface, and then I read something about inspiration at Disney. Now, we're going to get into the artists of this volume here. And the first one is Albert Herter. So, you ready? Alright, let's begin. Chapter 1, Albert Herter. That impenetrable mind of his was never easily figured out, but he was a most lovable character when you knew him. His imagination was rare and unique. Walt Disney. Rare. And here's a picture of Albert Herter working on the Silly Symphony, Peculiar Penguins from 1934. Rare and unique indeed. While working at the Disney studio, Herter was imagination incarnate. His drawings, thousands and thousands of them, seem to have been conjured by an army of dreamers gone cuckoo. Herter's range was endless and almost overwhelming, going from a very insect-like Jiminy Cricket, who could have been the main protagonist in The Metamorphoses of Kafka, to Keith Haring-esque marshmallow characters for the short The Cookie Carnival. I love that short. From bizarre mechanical creatures whose impossible perceptives could have been created by M.C. Escher to totally abstract drawings. Even in a studio that employed the best artists out of the country and from abroad, Herter really stood out. He was a genius, artist Joe Grant once noted in awe. He had a cigar in his left hand and a magic wand in his right hand. Oh yeah, I noticed the cigar in his hand as he's drawing. Anyways, he was the first of Disney's concept artists. A Swiss native in the New World. Albert Herter was born on May 11th, 1883 in Zurich, Switzerland. His father was a drawing teacher of mechanical engineering. On April 6, 1903, at almost 20 years old, Albert left Zurich for Berlin, Germany, to study art and architecture. He returned home in 1910, then a few years later spent some time in Paris, France. In August of 1914, Albert decided to come to America to avoid the chaos of the war. His ship reached Ellis Island on August 24th, 1914, a month after the start of World War I. Did Herter immediately join some of the pioneers of animation, the Canadian Raoul Barry and the American Bill Nolan, who had just set up their studio in New York City in 1914? He might have. What is certain is that by 1916 he was working in New York for Barre Bowers, the recently formed partnership between Raoul Barre and Charles Bowers, which was producing the rather primitive Mutt and Jeff cartoons. At Barre Bowers, Herter worked with artists like Bert Gillett, Ted Sears, Richard Humer, or Dick Humer as they called him, I. Klein, and George Stallings, who would all later move to California and be employed by Disney. Well, I should know. I read the credits of movies and I've seen all their names. Herter's artistic skills impressed his new colleagues. Around 1918, Albert Herter had to draw an American flag, remembered Dick Humer. He looked out the window, saw a flag, and, wonder of wonders, he actually copied the movement, studied it, and copied it. Something which nobody had done before. If you had done a flag before, you would take 3 drawings and have it merely sort of vibrate. But he analyzed the action and its folds, etc., etc. And then when this scene came out, we thought, this is the end, the living end. This is the greatest. In other words, we weren't blind to improvement. He was such a magnificent artist. When some realistic animation was required, added I. Klein, I wonder if his name was Irving. It was done by Herder. Despite the fact that animation was still a new art or profession at this time, it had already become set in rigid patterns as to how to animate a walk, a run, and other forms of motion. The reason for this, I believe, was that the animators had little or no real art training, so that their draftsmanship was very limited. They learned a series of set formulas at which they became proficient according to their individual abilities. Herder was an exception. His greater ability as a draftsman gave him a wider scope. In addition to being a skilled artist, Herder was also a very quirky man, as quickly became apparent to his colleagues. There was no clock in the studio, recalled I. Klein years later. There were no bells or other signals to tell us when it was lunchtime or quitting time. But everyone got up promptly at 12 o'clock and at 6 o'clock in the evening. It did not take me long to catch on. The timing signal came from Albert Herder. Albert would look at his watch, put it back into his vest pocket. He must have had a pocket watch. Reach for his hat and coat and head for the door. Then a scraping of chairs, shuffling of feet, and the studio would be emptied. Albert Herder's watch was always correct, and Albert was always prompt. Nice. Going west. Herder did not settle down in New York. The story of his departure in true quirky style is best told again by his colleague I. Klein. He said, I strolled up to Grand Central Station on East 42nd Street to take the subway uptown. As I was walking through the huge station, I heard my name called. I turned. There stood Albert Herder. I was startled, to say the least. What was Albert Herder doing down on a workday at 10 o'clock in the morning? He greeted me by saying, Do you know what has happened? My heart sank. The studio must have burned down during the night. He answered his own question. I am going to California now. I sat up all night thinking, should I go or not go? I decided I should. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his California train ticket. It was an accordion-folded string of tickets which unfolded from his hand down to the ground. Tell Mr. Bowers I am sorry to leave him without notice. Say goodbye to him and everybody. Wow. Having followed Horace Greeley's famous advice, go west, young man, Herder was still restless. He traveled to Mexico and the Southwest since the desert and Native Americans fascinated him. And he eventually arrived in Los Angeles, where he developed a modest commercial art studio, occasionally turning his hand to bits of animation for Hollywood producers. In 1925, he also illustrated a small book, Litany of American Holiday Prayer by Elwood Lloyd. By the late 1920s, Herder was working in Los Angeles for marketer Randolph von Nostrand, who described those early years in a letter to Walt Disney in 1953. He said, he was living in one room in the old Hotel Westminster on the corner of 4th and Main. I was selling direct mail advertising for a printed company, and for nearly a year I was Albert's principal means of support. He did all my layout, sketching, and artwork. During that time, Albert was always scrupulously clean in his appearance, but his clothes had been darned, mended, and patched times beyond mention. One day he came to see me. He was resplendent in brand new clothes, and the work of a tonsorial artist was also very apparent. He announced that he would not be able to work for me any longer, that he was going out to Hollywood to get a job with Disney. I asked him how he could be sure of a job, and with that calm confidence which you too must have known, he assured me that he would be successful. Then I asked him if he had robbed a bank. Albert confessed that each time I had paid him for his work, he had been investing in a ticket in the Chinese lottery, and that the week before he had caught a 6 spot, which had paid off several $1,000s. That was the last time I saw him. Oh, and here's a character study and storyboard drawing for the tortoise and the hare. Pretty cool, huh? Anyways, the first concept artist. After this stroke of fortune, Herder settled down. On June 1st, 1931, at almost 50 years of age, technically 48, he joined the Disney studio thanks to Ted Sears. Ted had been hired by Disney just 2.5 months earlier on March 16th. Along with Webb Smith, he formed the nucleus of what would become Disney's story department. On Ted's advice, Albert was recruited as an animator, and he was immediately put to work on the silly symphony, The Cat's Out, in which he animated the cat and the three trunks, before tackling animation on all of the next 8 silly symphonies, from Egyptian melodies all the way to Just Dogs, in the first months of 1932. Disney's story team began focusing on one of the next shorts, Bugs in Love, in March or April of 1932. Walt was the first cartoon producer to appreciate the special talents of the individual artists and allow him to concentrate upon the best thing he did best, explained Ted Sears. Since Albert's outstanding ability lay in humorous exaggeration and the humanizing of inanimate objects, he was soon released from animating and set to work drawing inspirational sketches. Each time a new subject was planned, Albert was consulted and given free rein to let his imagination wander, creating strange animals, plants, scenery, or costumes that might serve as models for the forthcoming production. Things were becoming extremely interesting for Herder. The genie was out of the bottle. He started drawing as he pleased, hence the title of this series. Some subjects appealed to him more than others, recalled Ted Sears, and consequently, these brought forth a greater variety of sketches. Disney had found the ideal outlet for Albert's talents. Frequently, when on a definite assignment, his mind and pencil would wander far afield, and the results would be weird and surprising, often furnishing the inspiration for an entirely new subject. His pencil was never idle. Grotesque figures, faces, and inexplicable forms verging on surrealism appeared in the edges of nearly every one of his drawings. When the idea for the 3 Little Pigs began to develop, it was Albert who designed the principal characters, their costumes, and their respective homes. Interesting. Another seminal short that benefited from Albert's designs was the silly symphony, The Wise Little Hand, in which Donald Duck made his first appearance in 1934. Animator Bill Cottrell recalled Albert's work on Donald Duck in particular.